Well, welcome everyone to another episode of WA This Week. Look, first up, thanks very much to everyone who came down to the Liberal tent at the Royal Show. We've done this 2 years in a row now, and look, it's just really great to have an opportunity to catch up with people, have a chat about politics, for people to make you aware of issues. So thanks for coming down, and look, we'll certainly be doing that next year as well. Perhaps on a less happy note is the issue we have with attrition in the police force in Western Australia. As was reported by our Shadow Police Minister, Peter Collier, recently, the numbers of police leaving the force are in absolute record numbers. In fact, the rate of police leaving the police force is almost double, or in fact double the rate that it was when the Labor Party came into power. And more concerningly, I think, is that it's the more senior police who are leaving the police force at a greater rate. And what this means is those experienced officers that can help train the younger officers, but also, obviously, because of their greater experience, have more ability in terms of being able to solve these serious crimes, more knowledge of the history of what's gone on before, and are able to use that knowledge to good effect in good policing. They're the people leaving the force at a greater rate. And the feedback we get from the police force is because they do not feel that they're treated properly and respected in the police force. And that sits at the feet of the police minister. You know, we've got a police minister that comes into Parliament, he loves to make glib comments all the time and sort of snide asides about the opposition. But he's not doing his own job. He's not focusing on the critical matter of having proper police resources in this state. Now, the Labor government and the police minister have boasted about the fact that they're increasing the police force. In fact, the police force is shrinking. Now, that's something that I think should be a worry for every community. And I can tell you, it is certainly a worry for the communities that are being afflicted by violent crime. As we've pointed out before, the rates of violent crime in Western Australia have increased by more than 20%. And some of you may have seen an article in the Western Australian by former Police Commissioner Carlo Callahan, who was pointing out that, you know, effective policing is not about gimmicks. It's about police being on the ground. We know that there's a major issue in Northbridge, and he made the good point. If we had police on the ground in Northbridge, you'd deal with a lot of the antisocial behaviour, but that's true right across the state. So, Minister Papalia needs to stop looking for sort of glitzy photo opportunities and making snide comments in Parliament, and needs to focus on making sure that police feel respected, feel wanted, and feel properly treated and want to stay in the police force, and then focus on getting other people to join so that we see police force numbers increase. This week you've seen a lot of glitzy press from the Labor Party about the opening of the Forrestfield-Airport link, and when the Labor Party came into power, that project in fact had already been started by the previous coalition government. So that project was planned and budgeted by the coalition government led by Colin Barnett, and the Labor Party came in and that project was going. Now, the Labor Party then inherited the project and said, oh, now this is part of their over-budget Metronet project, but they were going to deliver this, and here we are almost 2 years later, and they are only just opening the line, and for passengers, all sorts of problems, really terrible safety problems. You may remember the issue of the Huawei communication issue. You know, the government, the minister, against government advice and against external advice, proceeded with a contract, then had to bail on it. Cost the taxpayers of Western Australia over $100 million for a new contract. That's on top of the original budgeted amount, and so on. So they're opening it. You know, I think it's a feature of this Labor government that they do things in a tawdry way or an inappropriate way. And one of the things they do is play cheap partisan politics. Now, Premier Colin Barnett was instrumental in the initiation of that project and the kick-off of that project. And he's not even been invited to the opening ceremony. I reckon that's just appalling. Look, you know, sure, politics is competitive, but you know, there are many times in politics when you put that aside and you treat people properly and you respect people that have made a contribution. And that I can honestly say that when we were in government, that's exactly what we did. And where the other government had initiated projects, and those, you know, the relevant people would be invited along. Here we've got a government that just plays cheap politics, you know, with this project. And, you know, it is an interesting aside with this project. We've spoken before, you know, Metronet projects overall, the overall projects of Metronet, you know, billions of dollars over budget, years and years behind schedule. This is the only Metronet project which is on budget. And it goes to the fact that the Liberal Party was honest with the public of Western Australia. When this project was initiated, they put a proper budget in there. They put a properly costed budget there with proper contingencies. That's why this project's the only project on budget, whereas Labor simply misleads the public in terms of project costing, pretends that projects are going to cost billions of dollars less than they really do. And that's a real impact on the state because that money could be spent on other things. But look, let's see how the project goes. Given the way the government have managed this project, the Labor government have managed this project, I will say I'm not so optimistic that there won't be some issues along the way, but it will be good to see that project finally opened and passengers able to take the train to the airport. You know, a lot of things you come across in this role as a member of Parliament, and a lot of issues you see from time to time. Some of them you go, what? How could that possibly happen? And here I'm talking about the situation of running out of coal in Collie. Now, I was doing a little bit of research. There's somewhere around 2 billion tonnes of coal in the Collie Basin. Plenty of coal there. And we've got the ludicrous situation that the Minister for Energy has announced that they're shutting down the Collie coal-fired power station, and that's one of two major power station complexes at Collie that are owned by the government on top of a privately owned power station, Blue Waters. But the Collie power station is being shut down for 3 months because they've run out of coal. I mean, imagine that. They've run out of coal. So we've got a situation that we've got a major power station shut down. Now, this is despite the fact that there is a contract between Premier, the owner of the coal mine, and the government. It's an exclusive contract for the supply of coal, and that can be enforced by the government. And yet we've got an energy minister who's been asleep at the wheel. He's allowed this to get to the position where there isn't sufficient coal to run the coal-fired power stations. Now, I think many people might be surprised to know that the coal-fired power stations represent about 50% of the electricity capacity on the what's called the Southwest Interconnected System, but that's the whole electricity network in the southwest of the state. And in the last 12 months, I was just having a look yesterday, in the last 12 months, 32% of the electricity that went into that network, that was used by households and businesses, was produced by the coal-fired power stations. And here we are, heading into summer, and we've got a situation where they're running out of coal. And even, you know, that situation is bad enough, but then the minister comes up with ludicrous excuses for it. He said, oh, well, there was an accident at the coal mine that caused a shutdown, and it's been a wet year. Well, let's look at those two things. There was an incident at Premier Coal Mine, apparently. A bulldozer slid down the side of a coal mine pit. I mean, that's a serious thing. Now, there was an investigation, and that led to a shutdown of the mine for 10 days. Imagine having your supplies on such a knife edge that a 10-day disruption in coal production puts you in a position where you actually have to shut a power station down. Now, and then the minister said it was a wet year. Well, do you know what? This year has been an average winter. If you go back over the winters since the 1970s, you look at that average, it's an average winter. Now, it is wetter than a few years ago, but in fact, last winter was the second wettest winter on record. We didn't shut down coal-fired power stations then. So what's up, Minister? I mean, they are just ludicrous excuses. They're not excuses. This is clearly a problem that's been building for months and months, not a few weeks or not for a 10-day shutdown. and we're in this ludicrous position. Now, the real concern here is that this shutdown of this colleague coal mine means that the capacity, the electricity capacity in the network is at the target level now set by a group called AEMO. It's an independent government organisation that determines what power we need and what power supply we should have. And they set a target. But the Bluewater coal mine, which is the Bluewater power station, which is powered from coal from Griffin coal mine, is in a perilous situation. And that Griffin coal mine is having financial difficulty, and there's a real prospect that that mine will stop operating. Now, if that stops operating and they can't supply coal to the Bluewater's coal-fired power station, that'll take another 434 megawatt electricity capacity out of the network. Now, that would put us at serious risk of not having adequate electricity supplies coming into summer. Now, here's the kicker to all of this. Do you know what their solution to the problem is? The Minister has said that the government is considering importing coal from the eastern states. You know, this is just dumbfounding stuff. We've got a massive coal deposit. We've got 2 coal mines there. We've got the government intimately involved in all of this. And we're in a position that you'll be importing coal to Collie. I mean, talk about taking coal to Newcastle. We're going to be taking coal from Newcastle. You know, this is farcical stuff. It's complete incompetence by the Minister for Energy. And can I say the Minister for Energy, Bill Johnson, is the Minister for Mines as well. So there's no excuses here. This is appalling mismanagement by Minister Johnson and the state Labor government. Another thing you may have seen in the last week of Parliament, starting 3 weeks ago, the government, with less than a few hours' notice, introduced amendments to the Emergency Management Act. Now, the government and the Premier, McGowan, had made a great moment of the fact that they were going to end the state of emergency because it wasn't needed anymore. Well, what we saw with this amendment bill for the Emergency Management Act was just the most disgraceful attempt to mislead and, in fact, I think lie to the people of Western Australia that they're ending the state of emergency, because all this bill did was rename it. So now there's layers and layers to this, and I don't have time to go through all of them. This is the most appalling piece of legislation. So under this legislation, in fact, we're effectively going to be in a state of emergency, or at risk of being in a state of emergency, for the next 2 years. The amendments that have gone through the lower house and will be considered by the upper house this coming week, and the Labor Party will use their numbers just to ram it through, as they did in the lower house. This bill, this amendment, lasts for 2 years. I'll just go through some of the aspects that really concern me. Probably the worst part about this is that all of the powers under this change, and you're going to have a situation where the Emergency Management Coordinator can declare a COVID emergency, and that is an emergency in relation to the management of COVID, which has been the reason we've had the state of emergency over the last 2 years. Now, the State Emergency Coordinator is in fact the Police Commissioner, but the disturbing thing about the changes they're making is the Police Commissioner won't be subject to any review by anyone for any decision he makes in declaring that state of emergency. No one. He won't be answerable to Parliament. He won't be answerable to a minister. And if you go through the bill, the police commissioner is supposed to make a decision based on health consideration, on economic considerations and psychosocial considerations. He has to seek the advice of the chief medical officer or the chief health officer, but doesn't have to actually take that advice. He only has to seek it, but he doesn't have to follow that advice. and otherwise purely makes up in his own mind that an emergency exists. Now imagine, and I'll go through some of the powers very briefly, but for example, the police commissioner, under these new powers, can lock down regions of the state. So he can say no one can come in or out of the northwest of the state. He can't shut the state borders, that power is excluded. But in terms of inside the state, he can say no one can go to the southwest of the state. He can declare that all major public events are shut down. He can compel you to stay in your own home. He can actually order this, or in fact a police officer under these acts can seize your car and commandeer the car if they think they need it, or another vehicle. If they want to, this act allows them to break into your vehicle to do that. They can seize your property and take over your property. And if they need to, they can break in to do that. Now, I'm not saying that it's likely that these powers are going to be used, but what I'm trying to illustrate is that this bill provides really extreme powers. I mean, these are at the upper end of powers that any government would exercise against its citizens. And yet the only authority of all of this is vested in the police commissioner. It is the premier, the minister, the government cannot do anything to exercise any review or any change to that decision by the police commissioner. We're a democracy. This is wrong. You know, there are times you need extreme powers, but there should always be checks and balances. Now, this is not a criticism of the police commissioner. I'm sure the police commissioner is a very fine person, but this is a matter of principle. So, you know, it goes to the mind of this government, doesn't it? They are, you know, I've said before, they're drunk on power. And I think this is an example. This is an appalling piece of legislation. It's not needed, and the government should not pass this legislation through the House of Parliament. Look, I'll finish up there. That's a topic, and particularly that last topic is one we could discuss for a long time. But look, thank you very much for listening to WA This Week. Don't forget, you can subscribe to the podcast on any of your favourite podcasting apps. It's available on all of them. You can also watch the video and share the video if you just look up Dr. David Honey on Facebook, Spotify or YouTube. You can find out. Look, please share it with your friends, get the message out, and as always, please give us your feedback. We just love that and really appreciate the time you take to do it. Thank you very much.